Thank you all for coming and joining us on this panel discussion. I'm really excited to have this conversation with both of you tonight. So as you know, My Climate Hero is based on a youth-driven campaign, and this personally really excites me because I am a teenager and I really love seeing youth being actively involved in issues that are facing our society today and realizing it's affecting our generations and generations after us. So that's going to be a topic that we'll be discussing in this conversation, as well as the role of people of color and art and social change movements. To get us started, I just want to get a read of the audience and see our demographics. How many of you here are youth? Raise your hand. All right, solid amount. How many of you came here because of First Art Walk Thursdays? All right. How many of you here see yourselves as a climate hero? Hopefully, by the end of this conversation, all you guys will be raising your hands, because that's an important thing to see yourselves as when you're wanting to create social change. So to kick us off, I have a question for the both of you. So as you know, as I said before, My Climate Hero is a youth-driven campaign. What's one of the roles that youth has in enacting social change?
Thank you so much, Sarah, and hello, everyone. Just before I answer that, I definitely want to acknowledge the Duwamish people whose territory we are on right now, and I want to welcome everyone to International Women's History Month as well. Very important stuff. The role of the youth. I mean, there was something horrific, obviously, that happened in Florida, prior to that, horrific things that happened in Ferguson, horrific things that happened in Baltimore, and the people who were driving that, were young people, were the youth. One of my favorite bands, the Bad Brains. I'm showing my age now. I am not a youth. I feel great, but I'm definitely not a youth anymore. But they have an album called "The Youth Are Getting Restless," and the youth are getting. And when the youth get restless, that's a very, very, very good thing. In continents in like Africa, where there was apartheid, we saw the youth, taking the stand. So what role does the youth have? The youth have not only a role but a right to lead. And right now they're leading more than older folk. Right now. Last week tonight with John Oliver, when he was showing Sister Gonzalez's speech in Fort Lauderdale, he said it's amazing that the people who can't even say bullshit in front of their parents, because she was saying BS, are having more of a leadership role than their actual parents. So it's just a really exciting time to see young folk not waiting for a baton to get passed to them, but just straight up taking it, because some people who are a little older than me, but we've left y'all a toxic legacy. There's almost no choice, but to lead and to take over. And I'm all for it, because quite frankly, I'm getting a little tired anyway. So it's great to see you guys right up front, and we definitely love you guys for that.
Hi, I'm Brandon, and I think a quote that I heard a staffer on the Nikita Oliver campaign really signifies the role that youth is. Just like the youth right now are the truth right now. And I think that there is a big duality, because that word youth, we throw around a lot, right? Like, what necessarily makes youth? So I work with 8-year-olds every day, and I think that a big forgotten section of youth is the incredibly younger generation, right? Like the littles. So by working with 8-year-olds, the only president that my kids have ever known has been a black man, right? They have only ever known Barack Obama, who is a shining example of what it means to be a civic leader, and a shining example of what it means to be not only African American, but a person who identifies through so many different lenses, has been the leader of this country, right? And so much of what happens is reactionary, right? Something happens, communities mobilize, and we try to get something done. And if we want to stop being reactionary, we have to start being proactive. And the only way to do that is through education, which starts incredibly early, right? So many times we look to the youth in college, or we look to the youth in high school, and we forget about the youth who are actually growing up with this imagery, which is incredibly important. And making sure that we are working closely with educators, I think especially in preschool and primary, is going to be crucial in crafting the future that we all want. And the only way to do that is to start young. You know, I'm from Mississippi and we have lots of sayings, but my favorite saying is train them up early and they will go in the way of the Lord, right? So making sure that we begin as early as possible by crafting the narrative from jump is going to be crucial moving forward and seeing the outcomes that we want.
So you both talked about how you both see youth as the future of our nation and our society. What's one tangible action that youth can do right now and making progress in the climate change initiative, whether they're 8 years old or 18?
Yeah, so to that, Sarah, I have to tell this amazing story. We have a great local organization here in the Seattle area called the Backbone Campaign, and they have action camps every year on Vashon Island. And I had this amazing opportunity to speak with young people aged 10 to 12, who came to action camp to learn about how to get more engaged in climate action, climate direct action. And this 11-year-old was asking me for advice after telling me that she found out that her science teacher was a climate denier, so she arranged a walkout from her class. And I was like, can I get some advice from you? Because, when I was 11 years old, I was playing with the G.I. Joes with the Kung Fu grip. I was like not doing things like that. So I think that while there might be a double-edged sword with the advent of social media and Facebook, Twitter, and whatnot, where we do have to protect our young people, it does also give them so much more information. And for an 11-year-old to know that she had that power and that organizational prowess, I went to sleep really well that night. That's all I'm going to say. So I think that the only thing that I would change is it's not even about the future. The youth are right now because we don't really have time. We're in a deficit when you're talking about the climate crisis. We don't have we can't wait until 2050 to go 100% renewable. The game will be over, by then, and there won't be anything for the youth left to lead on. We saw amazing youth leadership by our Indigenous sisters and brothers at Standing Rock. One of the things that I saw when there were young people who were wanting to take direct action, and the elders were kind of no, we're here to pray. I saw a 14-year-old asked to address the council, and she was with all due respect, you guys prayed and we showed up. So I think that it's just about listening. I'm going to give a shout out to my son's grandfather, Paul Smith, who's out in the audience, and there is a biblical passage which says, and a little child shall lead them. And I think that, and I'm not even Christian, and I know that phrase, but that's huge. So I think that right now, keep doing it, and it's really inspirational.
Absolutely, thank you for that. Amazing. I think that when we think about the question of what youth can do right now, that's kind of twofold. First, I'll speak to what youth can do. Youth can do a lot of things, and I think that a big part of that is understanding how much power that youth have, regardless of age, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of whatever background youth come from. I think that there are, an immense amount of actionable items that youth, quote unquote, can do. And they're doing it. I think the problem really lies, do we as non-youth or adults empower the youth enough? A big memory that I have is asking my dad when I was 14, could I go to my first march, right? And a problem that exists is that we as adults need to get away and empower youth to not ask permission, right? We need to move away from this space where we think that, okay, youth are still learning, kids are still learning, they need to come to us for permission and guidance. When in all actuality, what we really forget is that these are people. They see the same events that we do. And in a lot of ways, at this age, they're way smarter than any of us because they have all the world's information at their fingertips. And that's a reality that I don't think adults are really ready to accept, especially when I have 8-year-olds coming to me ruining movies that are rated R, right? And I think, having those moments for me has really pushed me to think about, okay, how do I think about education? How do I think about my interaction with kids? And it's really more of me letting go of my status as, a gatekeeper, as an educator, and really opening as many gates as possible for my kids to walk through, and just being there as a guide when they have questions. And I think for all of us in this room, thinking creatively about how are we interacting with people who are younger or less experienced, not in a way that we are the keepers of knowledge, but rather we are pointing them in the direction that they can go make those decisions and come to those conclusions themselves. And what can we do to not only, help, but also amplify their resolutions when it comes to things like climate change and the like?
That was a great response from both of you. Thank you. So in the My Climate Hero campaign, students sent in questions as well for their My Climate Heroes. And Anthony, we have a question for you from Desiree. She asks, doing what you do doesn't make you happy, and if so, why?
It really depends on what day of the week you catch me in, how bad the Knicks lost that day, and a lot of other things. No, I mean, what I would say to Desiree is that I've been blessed with parenthood. I have a 2.5-year-old, and that is a game changer, right? Because he's a young black man to be, and the climate crisis, and I look at him smiling and giggling and repeating everything I say, including some things I probably shouldn't say in front of him, and it's like, in 4 or 5 years I'm gonna have to drop some stuff on you to not make you as happy anymore. We're gonna have to talk about Seattle PD and climate change and whatnot. I would say that more so than happy is that I'm satisfied with this call to service. Yoda teaches us that Jedis aren't necessarily happy, but they're content and they're at peace. And we have a whole group of people who I've worked with on different things. My brother Ben is back there, has worked with the valve turners, who shut off valves of Canadian tar sands coming into our country. Was Ben happy, when he risked arrest doing that? I can't answer that for him, but I think it was more of a satisfaction of setting that example for his daughter, Vivian, and the examples that we have to set as the brother was saying for our young people, to give them that platform. But most importantly, what I am happiest about is that when Zaire becomes even more talkative and doesn't think I'm cool anymore, which is why I'm so glad I have been made into a comic, because I'm going to be I've got, I'm kind of cool, but I'll be able to look him in the eye when he asks, what did you do? What was your role in that? That's what's going to make me happy. But I would say that what makes me the happiest is not necessarily what I do, but the community of people that I do it with. Great, just a great community.
Are there any times that you feel and this goes for both of you, are there any times that you feel like you're not making an impact that you want to?
Every day. I mean, as a public school educator, there's a lot of red tape that goes along with almost every decision that you make, right? And I think that, for me especially, I'm the only teacher of color in my building that services a population of 500 students, 60% of which are African American and Latino. And I am one man, and the school day only lasts 7.5 hours. And there are literally 300 kids who need that interaction, who have never had a black teacher, who have never had a teacher of color, some of which have never even had a male teacher or male figure that they can interact with in a positive way. And when we're really thinking about impact, I think what's important to remember is that impact is impact, whether it's big or small, right? So whatever you're doing for your community, whoever you're doing it for, it's important to remember that every little interaction, especially that you have with a child, that's the lens that I'm coming from, could literally save their life. And that is a weight that I carry with me daily and carry with me proudly, especially as, a poor black kid from Mississippi. Like, there are so many people who are in a similar situation to mine that did not have the same life chances, that didn't have the same support systems. And so many small interactions. I mean, heck, I don't remember anything from 4th grade, but I remember my teacher was dope, right? I remember all of the small interactions that kept me coming back to class. And those impacts on my life, to them, they probably don't even remember those conversations. But to me, have been formative in changing, my life outcomes. I'm sitting up here talking to you today about climate change because Ms. Grantham said that it was important to attend school, right? And I think that it's also important to remember that going forward, those interactions are so special and we might not even know it. So take the time to really be thoughtful in everything you do and everything you say, especially when it's someone who might consider you as a role model.
We were talking about before, or as you said, you're the only person of color teacher in your school, and we talk a lot about how we need people of color at the front lines of these initiatives. Reverend Lennox Yearwood, one of our icons for the Climate Hero campaign, he wrote an article how he was the only person of color in the immediate area at the March for Science walk in DC, and he was targeted by the police. So when people of color see happenings like this, how do we rally them to get a part of these initiatives and stop that mentality that this is only a white person issue?
I have so many things to say about that, and anyone who knows me in the audience knows. So I'm going to try to be terse, which is something I'm not usually. First and foremost, right, you cannot solve climate or address climate change without addressing racial justice, economic justice, gender ID justice, ethnic justice. Like, if one of those things are left out, you are not addressing the climate. One of the brothers who was up here last time was that, like, if it's just that wealthy people can sort of like move into a higher building, that is not addressing climate justice. We are seeing right now in this nation that, and it's kind of dangerous, and so I'm gonna have to get a little raw on historically white-led environmental groups, right now. We were talking about the polar bear instead of focusing on the people, and I've always make that joke that polar bears may be white, but they can't vote. But most importantly, I mean, we do have to focus this on the people who are hit first and worst, because it's just critical right now, whether it's indigenous people who are not just getting their land snatched from them in Louisiana, the land is sinking because of fossil fuel operations, or people getting choked out in Los Angeles by police and by toxic air. And the longer that we wait on addressing racial justice as the foundation, the harder it's going to be to address climate change. Now, how many people just have heard of Bill McKibben? Cool. And how many people have heard of Naomi Klein? Awesome. How many people know Dr. Robert Bullard? Oh, okay, less. And Dr. Beverly Wright, and Elizabeth Yampierre, and Tejas, and Uprose Brooklyn, and Climate Justice Alliance. Those are, Winona LaDuke. Please tell me you've heard of Winona LaDuke. Okay, thank God. It's going to have to come out there. But we talk about front lines, Sarah, but what we also have to realize is that the front lines are also our first line of defense. So they have to not only be a part or invited to the climate community, they have to lead it. And historically, white groups have to get out of the idea of the carpool mentality. And what I mean by the carpool mentality is that they'll pick up some frontline people, but they're usually in the back seat. They don't let them drive, and shift to a public transit mentality where everybody, is on and deciding the direction of that vehicle. But again, I'm just going to say it one more time, and then I'm going to shut up, is that no racial justice, no climate justice, no addressing climate change. And for anyone who does consider themselves a progressive, please tell Bernie Sanders and all of his followers that we damn sure do have to keep following and addressing identity politics, not getting away from it, but really getting into it. Whether you identify as a woman, as a transgender person, as a black person, as a young person, identity politics are critical. So let's not get away from that. Let's actually embrace that and realize that intersectionality is not a noun, it's a verb.
Yeah, just trailing off of that, I think that especially liberals, from my interpretation, since I've moved to Seattle more so than ever, we as people, ever since 2016, have been playing politics like a team sport, right? And I'm a black man from Mississippi, as I've said before, and all of my friends growing up were white Republicans, right? So I think that a big piece of this is that I noticed that people say, oh, well, I'm a climate change activist, or I'm a people of color activist, or I'm a women's rights activist. And it's like, we need to all just be activists for everything. Like, we can't continue to take the time to divide ourselves and put a priority on the thing that we care about most. I used to work with an organization called the Black Youth Project, and their saying was that no community will be free until the queer black woman is free. And I didn't really fully understand that until, about a year and a half ago, to the point to where the most marginalized communities and the most marginalized issues are the ones that need to be worked on with the most rigor and the most intensity. Now, don't get me wrong, it takes all types. And we definitely need people to focus in specific areas. If that's your interest, that's your interest. But you cannot continue to isolate yourself into a space that feels comfortable for you. We always talk about, we need to make the oppressive population feel uncomfortable. Progressives have a lot of uncomfort that we need to feel too, especially faux-gressives, right? And I think that until we have a serious conversation in our own house, that we really have no right going out talking, well, you need to feel this way, you need to feel that way. It's like, we need to feel a certain type of way about a lot of stuff, right? Like, we have a lot in front of us that we're not dealing with and we're not addressing. And so it's really no wonder that we can't get people on the other side of the aisle on board, because we can't even get our own collective together. So I think that we still have a lot of work to do in that, right? And until we are able to do that, we're not going to see the impacts and outcomes that we want.
Thank you. Thank you both for that. So you talked about how we need to kind of find that place of uncomfort to move on and move forward and progress. So this might be uncomfortable for some people in the room, but we're going to talk about privilege, because that's an important thing to talk about. So privilege and using that to the best of your ability. How do, let's say, white people use their privilege in the best way to fight for climate justice, racial justice, inequality in all aspects?
Yeah, okay, I'll take that one. Well, first off, I think the conversation goes beyond white people. I think it goes to men as well. So let's own that for a second. So for me personally, I have to check my privilege everywhere I go. And, going back to that compartmentalization thing, I was thinking my blackness is the first thing that checks my box. I am going to push that. That is where I'm walking around. And it wasn't until, I started dating my partner, Elizabeth, that she really opened my eyes to the fact that, yes, you might be a black male, but you can walk around at night with no fear, right? And I think that me having that realization has really opened my eyes to before we can even talk about anybody else's privilege, we need to understand our own privilege and what we bring to the table and what we need to leave outside before we even sit down. Now, if we want to talk about the idea of how people can utilize their white privilege, this is only going to be surface level because I am not white and I don't understand what it's like to be white. But I think that a big part of that is just recognizing and owning it, right? I don't think that you have to be ashamed of white privilege. Use it to your benefit and help other people. If you don't see a person of color in a space, do everything you can, exercise that white privilege and get somebody there, right? I think that we are looking at a lot of, the conversation about what white privilege is as a hindrance. It's oh, you no longer need to lead this movement. When in all actuality, I think we need to understand the practicality of it. And it's white privilege can also be used as a power, especially when we're talking about forces for good. And when you think about it in that lens and you help people who are living in and with white privilege realize that you have a lot of power to dismantle systems of oppression and help to promote communities of color and women and how to use their privilege for good, I think that there's a lot of power there that we as, again, liberals and faux liberals are missing.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, so tough. Because like I'm trying to keep mellow on this. I have so many emotions on this. What I would say first and foremost is listen, white people. Just listen. Listen to people of color. Listen to indigenous folk. I mean, I gotta tell you, gosh, this is being taped. Winona's gonna, no, it's fine. Winona's gonna be here in like a week, by the way, and she already knows that I feel like this. But I remember that I was out in Standing Rock, LaDonna, Brave Bull, and I were just watching people come in. And I was like, yo, this is a very, very dangerous time for Standing Rock. And she was like, why? Because of all the security? And I was like, no, because of all the white people coming in right now. And, you know, first they're going to take their pictures next to you. And then the next time they take pictures, they're going to be in front of you with their banners. So first and foremost, let's take a step back. And the amazing thing is we have, right here in Seattle, Tamara was talking about all the amazing leaders. We have an amazing leader right here, a white woman who coined the term white fragility, okay? Don't be fragile. You know, I mean, I understand that, like, right now what we are seeing is that this uprising of black, brown people coming for a power structure, you know, that previously has not been challenged as much as it is right now, because, you know, especially like the young people, brother talked about Black Youth Project, they've kind of shifted from Martin Luther King, you know, the sanitized version of Martin Luther King, and they're going Stokely and Asada and Angela and Ella Baker, you know, right now, of just sort of like, we're going to use your privilege to benefit us. Some of you know, if I'm not mistaken, the Kerner report that was released in 1967 with Lyndon B. Johnson, which talked about, you know, racial injustice, economic injustice. An update to that report was just released, and things have gotten worse somehow for black people. We talked about like Barack Obama. Somehow things got worse for black people and for brown people, and for indigenous people, it's just never, you know, gotten better. I think he hit the nail on the head of just like, if you're looking at your organization and you're talking about racial justice and everybody in the room is white, that's probably a problem. If you're talking about climate change and everyone in the room is white, that's probably a problem as well. There's an amazing report, Green 2.0, which I would recommend that everybody read, that shows that while women have definitely gotten into higher positions, boardrooms, executive directors, I don't think anyone in this room right now can name one major environmental organization with a black or brown executive director, whether it's 350, Sierra Club, NRD, well, I'm not NRDC, LCV, you know, any of them, and that's just like a big problem. So sometimes privilege needs to be used for austerity. Right, and that's not a bad thing. And just to like recognize that black power doesn't mean that we're coming for you and that we're trying to take you over. A little bit, but it's really about a politic of liberation. That's what it's about, right? And please don't say all lives matter.
So, Anthony, as you've discussed before, you've talked about reaching out to audiences that don't necessarily agree with you. How do we foster conversations with those who don't always have the same perspective or viewpoint as us without them putting their guard up immediately?
First things first is, like, don't believe, like, in the advent of all this social media that sending a text or sending a tweet or putting up a Facebook meme is a conversation, because it's not. We're hearing a lot of people take credit for what happened in Alabama with the election of Doug Jones. Like, Democrats, like, look at what we did, and like, you know, black women in Alabama are like, who the hell are you? You know, well, I sent 10,000 text messages to Lowndes County, and they're like, most of the people here don't have cell phones. You know, this was a Christian, a black Christian revolutionary-led front of black women, like, calling people on their church rolls and be like, did you go out and vote? No, I'm coming to get your ass right now. We're going out to vote. And that's how they did it. I just got back from Nebraska, where I am working right now with rural farmers in places that if you would have asked me 10 years ago would I have ever been there, I would have bet the small amount of money that I had, and I would have lost, which wouldn't mean I'd have any much less money than I do now. But I think you have to go to their communities. I do think that you have to listen, and sometimes it's about the terminology that you use. I've got a bunch of farmers who do regenerative agriculture who are probably doing more for the climate than the average coastal city person. I didn't use the term climate change. I use words like justice. I use words like raw deal. I use words like economics. But it's also about like going into those communities and stop using terms like flyover states or like, and I'm not trying to get all Barack Obama because I have my issues with President Obama, but or like red states and blue states. It's just people. You know, farmers in rural Nebraska see their water being tainted. They see hyper-capitalism taking over their way of life. And it's just, I mean, I'm a black guy with dreadlocks who identifies as a democratic socialist going into like the most red places, and I made it out alive like 4 times. Not only have I made it out alive, I mean, like they've cooked for me. They've taken me to church with them. I mean, these are like white people who are so white they glow. You know, and it works out. But what we have to also, what we can't, you know, what we have to get out of the mindset of is, and I love the marches and rallies, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 for this People's Climate March and that march. How much of that money could be used for like actual organizing of going into those like communities and really like making like a difference? One of my favorite conversations I have with Paul, my son's grandfather, is about going to Nebraska. He's from South Dakota, like Nebraska. I love those people now. I really, really do. And so I think that like it's just the messaging that we use and not thinking like, you know, right here, everyone here believes in climate change, I assume, right? Like believes that it's happening. Are there any climate deniers here? You're a climate denier?
Yes.
You don't believe in climate change?
I believe the climate's always going to be changing.
Do you believe in climate disruption?
Yes.
So you think the climate's being disrupted right now by human activity?
I do.
Okay, see, right there. I've made a believer. You know, I'm a convert.
It's always going to be changing. If we have a volcano, it's going to change.
And I agree with you.
If we have a sun that has a sunspot, the whole climate's going to change. I'm just excited to hear this, but I think it's very biased, and I appreciate you even asking.
No, I know. I appreciate this discussion. Can I do this for like 2 more minutes? But I mean, you do.
I think it's very political. I think it's very politicalized. I think it's divisive. I think it's just like, yeah, we do have climate change. If there was one thing I would do, I would just plant a bunch of trees. But I'm very concerned about this stuff. I'm strictly conservative. I'm very, very conservative. But I'm just trying to figure out, well, why is there so much division? Yeah.
Do you think climate change is dangerous?
I think that that life is dangerous.
Absolutely. No, for sure, especially for people that look like us.
The climate is always changing.
Yeah.
And who knows?
Absolutely.
It's not going to come from a place of fear.
No, I don't think any of us are coming from a place of fear. I'm especially not coming from a place of fear. I'm coming from a place of concern. And I want my kids to be able to play outside and not.
I would be here if I wasn't concerned also.
Absolutely. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just trying to wonder, how can we, in this conversation, and maybe this can take place afterward, how can we better find a middle ground so that we can communicate and create understanding between the 2 of us, or the 3 of us, or the 100 of us, so that we can affect change to make the best outcome for people in the future possible.
Well, I'm all for that too.
Thanks. Let's talk after.
That's it. Right. Yes. Exactly.
Well, that was a perfect example of my next question. Has there ever been a moment when you've had these conversations in which your perspective has changed?
That's a real big question. Specifically on climate change, yeah, I think that loosely that I have always believed that humans have had an incredible impact. I mean, almost like a cancerous impact on our planet. I believe it much more now than I did when I was living in a community of people who didn't believe it, right? I think that the conversations that I have now are more along the lines of not necessarily like changing viewpoints, but like what can we do on a day-to-day basis to make it better, right? I think a lot of the conversations that I have are especially with people who are much younger than me, almost 20 years younger than me, and it's just opening their eyes to not necessarily like freak them out or scare them like, oh, the world's gonna burn down, but rather to show them like, hey, you guys are really young. There are some really simple changes that you can make to your everyday lives now that will position all of us to have much better lives later. And so it's not necessarily going back to the piece about like having a change of mindset for me personally, but how can I do my part in just creating awareness for the next generation who ultimately is either A, gonna suffer the real benefits, the real detriments of this, and B, how can I do my part in making sure that they have the tools necessary to create actionable change? And all of that starts with day-to-day life. And once you have that foundation, then they can start thinking more broadly when they, come of age about how we can make, change on a community and a national and a global level.
Yeah. I would say for me, it's been in conversations with some of my mentors, Elizabeth Yampierre, Angela Adar, and an amazing woman who wrote a great book everyone should buy called Energy Democracy, Denise Fairchild, who works for an organization, another local organization, Seattle Rocks, by the way, guys. And we were talking about common ground. I just have to point this out real quick. Like, my son's grandfather is a Seattle Seahawks fan. I'm a New York Giants fan, and Russell Wilson was taking batting practice with the New York Yankees today, and so like that's the type of like fusion that we need. But I just had to throw that out there. I forgot to say that earlier. But I think what really changed my prospect of it was when these women and Indigenous women like Winona LaDuke and Tara Houska were like, all right, so let's say like we do go like 100% like renewable. Who's in control of that energy? Are we going to be just switching a fossil fuel empire with a renewable energy empire? Like so that's like really when I was just like, yo, like, I mean, it's when I realized that we have to just get rid of capitalism. I mean, we can never address climate change in a capitalist system because capitalism is extractive, and it's going to call for there's just always going to be a few people in control of the resources, and that's just going to lead to other forms of oppression, because climate change really is just a system of oppression. You are right, sister, it is divisive. It's because it's a system of oppression. So I would say what has changed for me is that I've probably been like even more hyper radicalized now, and really just want to do everything that I can to decapitate, dismantle, and dispatch of capitalism, because with it in place, there's always going to be some sort of like ruling class that has control over the resources, whether it's our food. Sisters who were talking about, have we spoken to Indigenous colleges, the water. You know what I mean? That's like another thing that we're not looking at right now. Water is being privatized, right now. I don't know if people realize that South Africa, they're about to turn off faucets, right now. So I think it's what shifted for me is like, if the people aren't in control of the resources and it's not decentralized and localized, then we're gonna have some it's gonna get Mad Max-ish, and I only have a bike. I don't even have a car, so we can't let it get to that point.
When you guys both show up to work, do you ever feel like you're fighting a losing battle, especially in this political climate right now? And if so, what keeps you going and what makes you show up?
Okay. What makes me keep going? I'll I'm gonna go in reverse order. What keeps me going, what makes me show up is Black women. Because like they rock, you know. They like I can't give up right now. Like Ida B. Wells, you know. I mean Harriet Tubman, Ella Baker. I can't give up. But are there days where I'm just like, what is happening? Why are we doing this? I mean, yeah. I mean, the bottom line is like millions and millions of dollars and lots of time was spent in North Dakota. The Dakota Access Pipeline is operating, but then another, you know, example of Seattle. It took us 2 weeks to divest $3.5 billion from Wells Fargo. We went to city council, we spoke to Shama, we spoke to Mike. You know, we called our city council members by their first name, and that like keeps me going. So that's like really amazing. But yeah, to be honest, I mean, like the reality of the science tells us, like even if we would have stayed in the climate Paris Accords, that was not going to keep us from a 2 degrees Celsius increase, but much less a 1.5 degree increase. And that's not to get like fatalistic, but again, what really keeps me going is this community of people. We drink together, we activate together, we drink together, we eat together, we cry, together. We play with each other's children, we babysit each other's children. It's the humanity of it, you know, at the end of the day, because like that's what we have to like remember. If we lose our humanity and our souls, and they have like come for our souls. And just one more thing, you said like the political climate. One thing that we have to realize, a transgender woman in right before the Clinton-Trump thing, she was kind of mad at the Democratic establishment and was saying to them, I'm a transgender Black woman. Do not try to scare me about a state of Trump. I'm already in a state of Trump. You know what I mean? And so like the political climate for me, and I think for Black and brown people and women, it's not like this president has like all of a sudden made all these bad things happen. I mean, this is the history of our country. This is what our country is built off of. This is the legacy of our country. So I'm not really changed, by the political climate of it all. I don't think that a political party is going to necessarily make changes. I put my faith in people over political parties myself.
Well said. I think when we talk about political climate, this is an incredibly touchy subject for me, just because, I work in a building that is pretty politically divided, and by building, I mean my school. We have Trump supporters, we have Clinton supporters, we have Bernie supporters, we have all sorts of supporters. The problem that I see is that in a space, especially like a school, it really shouldn't be about politics. You should always put the child and the scholar first. But innately, we're all human and we bring our biases to the classroom, which is incredibly frustrating. I think that I take it upon myself to hold very closely to my heart how I interact with my students, especially when we talk about things like race, politics, climate change, science not being optional when we think about like making decisions. And what really keeps me going is I have this little girl in my classroom named Christiana, and she came to me midway through the year and she was like, Mr. Hersey, I'm really excited to be here. She's 8, by the way. I'm really excited to be here, but I really don't like school. I'm like, well, why do you like school? It's like, well, I don't understand math and I don't understand science and I'm not very good at reading. And I've only had her for about 5 months, and Christiana has already made a year and a half of growth, right? And that is incredibly important because she has gone from a student who self-identified as not good at school to being a student who not only is amazing at school and was always amazing at school, but has gone to being a person who sees herself as being good at school, right? And those types of interactions and those types of like relationships that I get to build on a day-to-day basis, like really keep me coming back. Another quick anecdote is when I was teaching the lesson plan, part of the lesson plan was for students to list their heroes out on a big piece of paper so that we can draw commonalities between the heroes that they like or that they know to the climate heroes. And I was expecting to see, Iron Man, Captain America, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. And like so many of my students gave me responses like, because, being African American, like, Black History Month is lit in my classroom, they gave me responses like Barack Obama, Mae Jemison, who was the first African-American astronaut. They even said my partner Elizabeth, who is in medical school right now at UW, shout out to you. And they said people like, my bus driver, because they wake up every morning and deal with these crazy kids on this bus, right? And so I think that a big part of what keeps me and so many other educators coming back is seeing the cultural shift for the future happen in front of us every day. And that for me is worth my week paycheck. That for me is worth the 30-minute commute down to Federal Way in the rain, in the dark, which for me is real new, and that is like the biggest driving factor for me. Just seeing that we are gonna be fine, y'all. I think Kendrick said it best, like, we gonna be all right, especially if we're putting the power in the hands of not the oppressor, but the youth that are coming in the next generations to follow.
Definitely. Great responses from the both of you. So as you were saying, you're coming from an educator's perspective, and I wanted to ask you, what is the importance of representation of youth in these climate justice movements? As we can see, My Climate Hero, we had a very diverse cast of icons, and what's the importance of youth seeing themselves represented in that?
I think the importance of that, and I think immediately to that picture of Barack Obama where he's bending over and the little boy is like feeling on his hair. I am desperately trying to get that photo printed and hung up in my classroom, because so much of being involved in any movement for youth, for marginalized communities and what have you, is understanding that there is space for you here. Right? Like for me personally, I remember like sitting with my dad watching the inauguration happen and just seeing him cry. I'd only seen my dad cry a couple of times before. And I didn't really understand it until very recently, because like until Barack Obama had been elected, there had been no context for who could be president other than like rich white guys, right? And ever since then, that mold has been so broken and so dismantled that people are starting to realize that, okay, we don't only need representation because it's innately positive. We need representation because the world is more than straight white men, right? And for me personally, making sure that my kids have imagery of leaders who look like them is so transformational, not only in math and science, not only in, being a good person, not only in civics. And I think that the climate movement could learn a lot from that, because so much of what we are preaching realistically could affect us, but most of us are going to be long gone before we experience like the real shitty end of it. And it's really going to be up to, the kids that we're teaching now, the youth, your son, a lot of the like babies that are running around in the room right now, and making sure that they know that even at, whatever age, they have the tools necessary to be successful, to be a part of the movement, and to make change.
So we talk about this vision and our future generations and what the world is going to look like for them with this movement of climate justice and people taking action now. For both of you, describe a vision of this world where we respect and take care of our environment.
Wow. Well, there's an exercise that one of my just dear friends, young leader Dante Berry of Million Hoodies for Justice, down with the Dream Defenders, who of course sat in Rick Scott's office after the execution of Trayvon Martin, and he asked me once, like, close your eyes, and think about the world, in your safe space, who's there, So for me, definitely unarmed and demilitarized police, first and foremost. Probably some form of reparations. I'm going to be straight up to indigenous folk as well as folk who have not been compensated for working on stolen land. Nothing that emits anything that I wouldn't be able to breathe and not get sick with. There's just like no need for that. Clean water, universal basic income times 2. Just green, everywhere, like in terms of like, gardening and people knowing how to produce their own food. And I guess like really what it is just respecting indigenous knowledge again. I'm just this idea of cooperation instead of competition is what that world really looks like to me. Having conversations with this sister right here who we don't necessarily like agree on everything, but our disagreements doesn't like mean that we're going to kill each other. It just means hopefully we drink with people we disagree with more than the people we agree with. It's more fun, by the way, to drink with people you disagree with. I have found, myself. But I mean, overall safety and harmony and access to everything, for everyone. But I think that's what it looks like for me. You definitely pay our teachers a lot more money.
Yeah, please. Send money now. I think for me the most iterative image of like what taking care of our planet looks like is I really loved the poster of an African American woman that was posted up from one of the campaigns that said that we the people take care of each other, right? And we can't even think about taking care of our climate the way that we need to until we start thinking about taking care of one another the way that we need to, and positioning not only those of us who are rich, wealthy, and white to be successful, but rather what can we do to position everybody to be successful? And I think that innately, by instilling that care and succeeding in instilling that care for everybody, we will have a profound impact on our climate as well. I think if I had to think about tangible effects, I want to see more outdoor spaces that aren't gigantic, huge, like construction projects. I want to see less cranes in Seattle. I want to see more people outside appreciating what, we have in this beautiful area. I come from Mississippi yet again, and the first time that I came here and saw mountains, like the highest mountain in Mississippi is 800 feet above sea level. And now my apartment is double that, right? So like for me, and I'm also a proud Eagle Scout, and I Scoutmaster a troop down in South Seattle, Troop 008, seattletroop008.org if you want to go check us out. We are an exclusively African American and other boy of color troop. We do not meet in a church, we meet in a community center, and we are rewriting the narrative of what traditionally scouting does for boys, but for our community. And some of the most transformative moments that I've had in my life is taking boys from South Seattle who see the same thing every day, a whole bunch of concrete, and taking them out into the wilderness. We went to Wallace Falls not too long ago, and not only do we take the boys, we take their families as well. And we had several parent and boy duos just standing there looking at a waterfall up close that they had never seen before. We can't start to think about our planet and how to save it until we make our planet more accessible. There's no way that, unless we break down barriers, kids in South Seattle are going to be able to afford to go see Mount Rainier, to go see Wallace Falls, to go see all this incredible stuff around them until we start making it a priority. And people don't care about what they don't know about. And you don't really know about the planet until you get out and experience it. So I challenge everybody in this room to find a kid and take them to see a waterfall. Take them to Mount Rainier, take them skiing, take them to a beach, show them the environment that we live in, and then you have to create that buy-in. Just like education, just like changing policy, unless you have buy-in from the community members and the stakeholders, you're not going to see any change. So take your kids outside now.
So before we end off, do you guys have any questions for each other, or do we have any questions from the audience that you would like to ask our panelists?
So I was just in Mississippi not too long ago.
Great.
As well. And I wanted to ask, a lot of people like think of Mississippi as being this previously subjugated black community, but in reality, one of the most radical, traditions, and whatnot. What, elements of rural black tradition do you think are germane to bring into the, urban setting, that could be used to address all of these various forms of oppression?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that the black diaspora could really benefit from breaking down barriers within itself. I think that any culture or any piece of rural Mississippi or any rural African American community, I would say, quote unquote, is fair game as long as you do it authentically, right? Like if we're thinking about how to do it in relation to climate change and how to, really use it as an impact for change, I think just finding an appreciation for the land, right? Understanding that, this land is not a building. The building is man-made. It has not always been here. It will not always be here. But when I grew up in Mississippi, from an early age, I worked on my grandmother's farm, mostly because, I wanted to get paid so I could get my next pack of Pokemon cards. But as I grew older, I understood that land is wealth. Land is equity. Land is something that has to be respected. And land is something that has been here long before us and will supersede us. And it is a gift to us. Not only do we live on it, we get our food from it. We, get married on it. We have our children on it. It is such an afterthought to so. I don't even think it's fair to call it an afterthought as much as a neglected piece of our lives, that we don't take care of what we don't see, which goes back to that piece about taking kids outside. We need to take our kids away from the city. And so much of growing up in Mississippi is swimming in the river, going camping, climbing trees, understanding that, our ancestors were brought here by force, and they worked it literally until they died. Our roots, our blood, our personhood is deep in the soil beneath us, and there is an ancestral tie that goes so deep into the roots and into the soil that it is literally where we came from, and it's literally where we're going. So developing that understanding and making sure that kids experience that is probably the biggest takeaway that I could recommend to bring to a place like Seattle, because it is a very transient population. A lot of people that I've met who are from Seattle aren't really from Seattle. And so until we can start fostering those connections ourselves and rewriting the narrative of what it means to be a person of color in Seattle, especially a black person in Seattle, I think we're going to continue to see a lot of those roadblocks that we talked about tonight.
And then, Sarah, I wanted to ask you, you're a teenager and got a room here of, I hope, funders as well, but people who are advancing it. What do you need from us as a young person? What are your asks of us?
Yeah.
I think, well, you guys talked about this before, is actually just listening to what we have to say, rather than thinking we're dumb, ignorant little children who don't know anything about what's going on in the world. I think just being there to actually listen to our ideas and support us in any way that you can possibly can, because there are some kids who are doing amazing things at 8, 11 years old.
You, right now.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that, but... But just giving that ear and listening to what the youth has to say, because we do have a perspective. Like you said, we are humans too. We are watching what's happening to our earth, what's happening in our society. We know a lot more than you actually think. So just taking that stance and listening to what we actually have to say.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for being a part of this discussion. You guys had such wonderful ideas, and I learned so much from you too today. Thank you to our audience as well for being a part of this. I hope you all learned a little something from the discussion and see yourselves as climate heroes from this day on. So thank you.